People have been screaming like they're part of a prison riot. Oh my God, look at what Musk is doing. He's looking at the spending. And I've listened to people talk about the process and debate whether it's constitutional and discuss how many lawyers can dance on the head of a pin. But you know what? I haven't heard one single person who's upset with President Trump or Mr. Musk talk about what he's found. They don't want to talk about the spending porn, the waste of taxpayer money that he's found. I mean, that's the point of all this. I've been in the Senate for 8 years. In dog years, that's 56 years. And it feels like 56 years. I've learned a lot, met a lot of interesting people. Before I got here, everybody told me about the Washington bubble. And I said, how serious could they be? Well, it's true. There is a Washington bubble. This place is different. It's in its own way, sometimes disappointing, sometimes refreshing. It is deeply weird. For one thing, common sense is illegal in Washington. It's illegal. For another thing, I've discovered that this is a town of very frustrated ex-class presidents. And there's a Washington way of doing things. And when things aren't done that way, when somebody challenges the status quo, many, not all, but many of these frustrated ex-class presidents in Washington, on the Hill and otherwise, they get excited, not in a good way. They can't get their mind around doing anything other than the Washington way. Some of them, particularly in the media, they go almost catatonic, or the exact opposite. They foam at the mouth. And they really get upset. They can make a Valium nervous. It's like the world, we're not doing things the way we've always done them, and the world's going to spin off its axis. I want to try to put in perspective what many of my Democratic friends have been talking about today. They're very, very, very upset at President Trump. And they're very, very, very upset at Elon Musk. President Trump ran for president on a number of issues. One of the issues he ran on, he said it almost every day. He said, if you elect me president, I'm going to go through the entire budget and review all the spending, line by line. If I heard him say that once, I heard him say it 1,000 times. And that's what he's been doing. He went out and appointed, through an executive order, Elon Musk, who some people like him, some don't, but he's not a dummy. He's a very successful business person. He's got a top secret security clearance. President Trump issued an executive order, and he turned to Mr. Musk, and he said, Mr. Musk, I want you to do for me what I said I was going to do in the election. I want you to go through all the spending, line by line. Now, let me ask you something, Mr. President. How are you going to review the spending without reviewing the spending? How are you going to audit the spending by an agency without auditing the agency? That's what I mean when I say common sense is illegal in Washington, D.C. That's what Mr. Musk is doing. He's put together a crackerjack team, and they're going through everybody's spending line by line, item by item. And my Democratic colleagues are very, very, very upset. And they've been very eloquent. They've talked about the process, and President Trump's executive order supposedly violates the Constitution. And they've accused Mr. Musk of having conflicts of interest. And so I've heard people say he's sitting over there with a notepad, copying down everybody's Social Security number, and he's going to go use it to make money. I mean, people in this town, not just my Democratic colleagues, they're really upset. They've never had anybody question their spending. But that's what Mr. Musk is doing. But you know, I've listened. This has been going on for a week. People have been screaming like they're part of a prison riot. Oh my God, look at what Musk is doing. He's looking at the spending. And I've listened to people talk about the process and debate whether it's constitutional and discuss how many lawyers can dance on the head of a pin. But you know what? I haven't heard one single person who's upset with President Trump or Mr. Musk talk about what he's found. They don't want to talk about the spending porn, the waste of taxpayer money that he's found. I mean, that's the point of all this. I tell you who is interested: the American people. The people in America who get up every day and go to work and obey the law and pay their taxes and try to educate their kids and try to do the right thing by their kids and try to save a little money for retirement, and have had to live through 20% inflation under President Biden. They understand what Musk is doing. They understand spending porn and wasting taxpayer money. Now, Mr. Musk started with the USAID. That handles a lot of foreign aid for America. American people are very generous. In our country, you know, when you're homeless, we'll house you. When you're hungry, we'll feed you. In our country, when you're too poor to be sick, we'll pay for your doctor. And we send a lot of money overseas to help our world's neighbors. And the USAID is in charge, in large part, of that. But I'll tell you what Mr. Musk discovered. I find it fascinating. He discovered that the American taxpayers are giving money to Afghanistan. He found that we are giving money to Yemen. He found that we are giving money to Syria. I didn't know that. Some of our foreign aid is going to Yemen, Afghanistan, Syria. He found that the USAID has 10,000 people. 10,000 people, employees. And every year they give away $40 billion. Mr. Musk also found, and I'm not saying that all of this money is wasteful. I'm not. Some of this money, I'm sure, does some good. That's why Secretary Rubio is going to revamp the department to separate the good from the bad. But this is the kind of stuff Mr. Musk found. He found that the USAID gave money to support electric vehicles in Vietnam. Our money, taxpayer money. He found that USAID gave money to a transgender clinic in India. I didn't know that. I bet you the American people didn't know that. He found that the USAID gave $1.5 million to a Serbian LGBTQ group called Grupa Izladaji. I probably mispronounced that, my apologies. Anyway, they got $1.5 million to, quote, advance diversity, equity, and inclusion in Serbia's workplaces and business communities. What else did Mr. Musk found that my colleagues don't want to talk about? Well, he reviewed a study and then went and checked it. The study was done by the Middle East Forum. They found that USAID spent $164 million to support radical organizations around the world. We're not talking Cub Scout troops here. We're talking about radical organizations around the world. They gave $122 million of that to groups aligned with foreign terrorist organizations. Our taxpayer money. According to this report in Mr. Musk, the USAID has given millions of dollars to, quote, organizations in Gaza, controlled by Hamas. Why aren't my colleagues talking about that? Recipients of the money, they found, have, quote, called for their lands to be cleansed from the impurity of Jews. That's what we're giving foreign aid to. What else? I'm not going to spend my whole time talking about this, but nobody else is talking about it. They're just talking about the process and Mr. Musk, and he's a mean guy, and he shouldn't be looking at our spending. Well, he is. And I kind of find what he's found out interesting. He found that we gave $2 million, USAID did, for sex changes in Guatemala. He found that we gave $20 million to produce a new Sesame Street show in Iraq. He found that we gave $4.5 million of taxpayer money to combat disinformation in Kazakhstan. He found that we gave $10 million, USAID did, of meals to an al-Qaeda-linked terrorist group called the Nusra Front. Mr. Musk found that we gave $7.9 million of taxpayer money to a project that would teach Sri Lankan journalists to avoid binary gendered language. The USAID took $8 million and gave it to a bunch of journalists in Sri Lanka to teach them how to avoid binary gendered language. I don't know what the hell binary gendered language is. I think I do. You think most taxpayers would support that? Why aren't we talking about that? The USAID gave $1.5 million to promote LGBT advocacy in Jamaica. They gave $1.5 million to rebuild the Cuban media ecosystem. They gave $1.5 million for, quote, art for inclusion of people with disabilities in Belarus. Another $3.9 million for LGBT causes in Macedonia. $8.3 million for equity and inclusion education in Nepal. I could go all night. And many of my colleagues are upset. They're really mad at Mr. Musk. Hell, I think we ought to give him a medal. All he's doing is what President Trump said he was going to do. President Trump said he's going to audit the spending. So Trump goes and hires Musk, again with the top secret security clearance. Nobody can quibble with his intelligence. You know, The guy's as smart as Einstein's cousin. He's a very successful businessman. Some say he's the richest guy in the world. And he's doing the auditing. And man, he's finding a lot of stuff. I call it spending porn. Now, I'm not saying everything that USAID does is wasted. But I'm saying a lot of it is. A hell of a lot of it is. And we ought to be on the floor of this United States Senate thanking Mr. Musk. And we ought to be asking him to go through every agency and look at everybody's budget. Everybody's budget. That's what the American people want. They don't want to talk about process. They don't want to continue with the Washington way. They want to save some money. Now, let me tell you what's really going on here, too, Mr. President. For 4 years under President Biden, and for 8 years under President Obama, and I respect both of them. I don't hate anybody. I don't. When I say my prayers at night, one of the things I ask God, God, don't let me hate, because it's hard in Washington. Don't let me hate. I have all the respect in the world for President Biden and President Obama. Tough job. But between them, they spent 12 years in Washington. And presidents set the tone. They control the questions that are asked. And here's the question that President Obama and President Biden asked for 8 years. I heard it for 12 years. I heard it every single day. Who needs to pay more in taxes? Is it you? Is it you? Who needs to pay more in taxes? We need more money. Who needs to pony up more? That was the issue. But that's not the issue today. We have a new president. You know what the issue is today? What the hell happened to all the money? What the hell happened to all the money? And that's what Mr. Musk is finding out. That's all this is about. And I'm just shocked that my colleagues have decided that this is a hill they're going to die on. How can you look the American people in the eye and support this kind of waste? Support this kind of spending porn? I mean, the election to me made at least one thing clear, that the American people are sick and tired of people in Washington denying reality. The last administration tried to convince us that we were living in a crime-free world where inflation was temporary and the border was secure. And the American people didn't buy it. You know why? Because it wasn't true. And the administration, our last administration, tried to argue that Bidenomics was making our lives better. But the American people knew differently. I mean, I've got a single child. He's a grown man now, but I remember puberty. I learned during puberty that reasoning, there's nothing wrong with teenagers, that reasoning with them will not aggravate. That's just also a law of nature, I think. But boys and girls, the differences between them explode during puberty. The ACLU, which believes that transgender women, biological males who transition into transgender women, they say it's a fact that trans girls are girls. And the ACLU and other activists have also said that it's a myth. They call it a myth that transgender female athletes, like Katie, formerly John, they say it's a myth that transgender female athletes have a physical advantage over girls. They're wrong. This is wrong. You don't need a graduate degree in anatomy to know that. I mean, those claims are specious. Medical science and athletic data both demonstrate that the difference is obvious and that males, no matter how they identify, have a significant advantage over females in girls' sports. Even before birth, when the baby is in a mother's womb, this is a scientific fact, baby boys begin developing different hormones and skeletal structures than baby girls that help them outperform girls when they're older. That's just a fact. We can say we wish it weren't. I'm fine with it. Some people say, well, that's bad. Well, take it up with nature. Take it up with God. But it's a natural fact. When that baby's in the womb, testosterone exposure for that baby boy alters his brain development. That improves that baby boy's motor skills and increases that baby boy's aggression vis-a-vis a baby girl. Both motor skills and aggression give that baby boy, when that baby boy grows up, an advantage over a girl in women's sports. Boys, the science also shows, they go through what's called a mini puberty. Still a baby boy in the mother's womb. The baby boy experiences a mini puberty, is what the scientists call it, right before birth, that helps a baby boy, once that baby boy is born, to gain weight faster than if he were a baby girl. And that ultimately is why boys tend to be taller than girls once they're born, on average, later in life. Now, the differences between boys and girls, again, this is a law of nature, or a law of God, depending on what you believe. The differences between boys and girls explode during puberty. I mean, I've got a single child. He's a grown man now, but I remember puberty. I learned during puberty that there's nothing wrong with teenagers, that reasoning with them will not aggravate. That's just also a law of nature, I think. But boys and girls, the differences between them explode during puberty. Boys develop 14% larger hearts when they go through puberty, and 12% larger lungs. So boy versus girl, the boy's heart is going to be 14% bigger and in lungs 12% larger. An obvious advantage in sports. That helps boys take in oxygen and pump blood more efficiently than girls can. That's just a fact. And that gives them a clear edge in endurance sports: running, cycling, rowing, basketball. Girls also, during puberty and afterwards, develop a wider pelvis. This decreases the amount of force their legs exert when they're lifting, or when a girl is kicking, or a girl is pedaling, which also puts a girl, as an active nature, at a relative disadvantage when you compare female athletes to male athletes. Boys during puberty and after puberty on the other hand, they develop broader shoulders than girls. I think we know that. When they develop those broader shoulders, that makes space for upper body muscle mass. It is hard to think of a sport in which a higher muscle to fat ratio, and boys have a higher muscle to fat ratio. It is just a scientific fact. It's hard to think of a sport in which a higher muscle to fat ratio is not helpful. The average boy will also grow, again, scientific fact, 5 inches taller than the average girl. And even when men and women are the same height, men have higher levels of bone density, which helps them move more forcefully and escape more injuries. And that, I mean, you don't, again, boys just have a physical advantage over girls, and we see it in everyday life. So there are 2 doors here. Door number 1, pass it. Largest tax cut in the history of America. Door number 2, don't pass it. Largest tax increase. $4.3 trillion. That's how much taxes will go up on ordinary Americans. Not just the rich. I know they're going to tell you that. It's just the rich. No, it's not. It's ordinary Americans. It's every American. We don't pass this bill. You raise taxes $4.3 trillion on 300 plus million Americans, and you watch this economy go down like a fat guy on a seesaw. As you know, we're working hard on reconciliation. I suspect we're going to have a bill before us here in a few days. It's very important. It does a lot, and I know reasonable people have disagreed over it. But first and foremost, if we pass the bill, it will represent the largest tax increase in the history of our country. Let me say that again, because sometimes we tend to lose sight of the main purpose of the bill, of the forest, as we start battling about the trees. If we pass this bill, it will be the largest tax cut in the history of America. But the converse is also true. If we don't pass this bill, it will be the largest tax increase on the American people in the history of America. So there are 2 doors here. Door number 1, pass it. Largest tax cut in the history of America. Door number 2, don't pass it. Largest tax increase. $4.3 trillion. That's how much taxes will go up on ordinary Americans. Not just the rich. I know they're going to tell you that. It's just the rich. No, it's not. It's ordinary Americans. It's every American. We don't pass this bill. You raise taxes $4.3 trillion on 300 plus million Americans, and you watch this economy go down like a fat guy on a seesaw. We don't have a choice. But as we're discussing reconciliation, there's another issue that I don't want us to forget about. Put up that first chart for me. Reconciliation is about cutting and spending, but what we call rescission is about cutting. As you know, Mr. President, the United States Congress is responsible under our Constitution for passing a budget. And when we pass a budget and send it to the president, any president, the president can either veto it or sign it. What he can't do, or she can't do, is go through it and say, I like this, I want to keep it, I don't like that, I'm going to cut it. That's called a line item veto. President Clinton tried it, and the United States Supreme Court said, can't do it. So the president, once we pass a budget, has to swallow it whole or has to spit it out. But one of the tools that the president does have, the executive branch has, every president has, is the power of rescission. You're going to hear that word a lot, rescission. What does rescission mean? It just means the president looks at the budget and he says, you know I can't change it on my own unilaterally. But I, the president, can ask Congress to change it. I know you just passed this budget, but I think you made a mistake here. I think you shouldn't have spent this money. Or I think you spent too much money and we've got to cut back. So the president can send us what's called a rescission bill. And we've got to take it up. We don't have a choice. And in that rescission bill, the president says just what I just implied. I don't agree with this spending, and I want you, Congress, who put it in there, to take it out. We can't afford it. Or it's wasteful spending, what I call spending porn. And we have to take up the president's request, and we can vote yes or we can vote no, but we cannot dodge it. And it only takes a majority vote to pass the president's request. The president has sent to us a rescission package. It's $9.4 billion, as you know, Mr. President. $9.4 billion. The President is asking us to remove spending that Congress appropriated for areas in foreign aid and for public broadcasting. I want to talk about the foreign aid part. We're going to have plenty of time to debate whether we ought to agree with the President. But I want the American people to understand the type of spending porn that President Trump is asking to take out of Congress's budget. The Honorable Jody Arrington, who is a congressman, damn good one too. He's chairman of the House Budget Committee. The congressman put together just a few items in the foreign aid spending provisions that the President's asking us to remove. This list is illustrative. It's not exhaustive. And I just wanted to point a couple of these programs out. Again, this is spending the President is asking us to revoke. You be the judge, folks. It's your money. American people can decide whether we ought to spend their money on this or take it out as the President has requested. I'll just mention a couple of the programs. Congress appropriated $4 million for sedentary migrants in Colombia. The President wants us to take it out. Congress appropriated, and let me say, in many of these cases, we didn't appropriate the money for the specific things it was spent on. The bureaucrats did that. We might have sent the executive branch, let's say, $3 million for foreign aid, and the executive branch, the bureaucrats there decided, under President Biden, decided how the money would be spent. So I know Congress is not blameless, believe me, but we did not approve these specific items of expenditures. We approved the amounts and the general subject area like foreign aid. The bureaucrats did the rest. The bureaucrats decided to spend $3 million for circumcision, vasectomies, and condoms in Zambia. You decide whether that's a priority. $3 million for sexual reproductive health in Venezuela. $2.5 million for teaching young children how to make environmentally friendly reproductive health decisions. I didn't know there was any such thing as an environmentally unfriendly reproductive health decision. $167,000 the bureaucracy has spent or is proposing to spend on free education and health care to migrants in Ecuador and Venezuela. $67,000 to provide insect powder to children in Madagascar. Mr. President, have you ever had insect powder? Don't answer that. I don't think I'm even supposed to be asking you under the Senate rules, but I haven't had it. In the area of LGBTQIA and gender programs. And again, you be the judge, whether this is something we ought to be spending your money on when we've got $36 trillion of debt. LGBTQIA stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, and asexual. The one I had to look up was intersex. Apparently, intersex is when someone identifies as both a man and a woman. The bureaucracy wants to spend $5.1 million to strengthen the, quote, resilience of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, and queer global movements. The President has asked us to take it out. $833,000 for services for, quote, transgender people, sex workers, and their clients and sexual networks in Nepal. $643,000 for LGBTQIA programs in the Western Balkans. $567,000 for LGBTQI programs in Uganda. $33,000 for being LGBTI in the Caribbean. In the area of the climate, Mr. President, the bureaucrats want to spend, and President Trump wants us to take it out, $6 million appropriated for net zero cities in Mexico. $2.1 million for climate resilience in Southeast Asia, Latin America, and East Africa. $614,700 for climate adaptation, including growing coral reefs in the Caribbean. $500,000 to Rwanda to buy electric buses. Your money. $8,000 to promote vegan food in Zambia. In terms of electoral assistance, the bureaucracy has some ideas about how we ought to spend the money appropriated to the executive branch to help people in their elections. The bureaucracy wants to spend $1 million on voter ID programs in Haiti. If you know anything about Haiti, it's a mess. They're not about to have elections anytime soon. $889,000 for electoral reforms and voter education in Kenya. In the area of media, arts, and culture, the bureaucracy proposes to spend $6 million to support media organizations and civic life in Palestine, and $3 million for Iraqi Sesame Street. This is just a taste, Mr. President. This list is illustrative. It's not exhaustive. So when you see us debating whether we should reduce the federal budget by $9.3 billion, which the House has already decided to do, and now it's our turn. And I say, which I have repeatedly said and will continue to say, is that all the president is asking us to do is cut the spending porn from the budget. You can make up your own mind. It's your money. If you think we ought to be spending the money on this, encourage us to vote no. But if you think you could spend this money of yours better than the bureaucracy could, or we could spend it on our kids or our roads or our health care, then encourage us to vote yes. Thank you, Mr. President. I see my colleague, Senator Warren, is here, so I will yield the floor. We just spent 13 hours on motions to commit. I'm not blaming my Democratic colleagues because we had to agree to it. But anybody with a brain above a single-cell organism knows that a motion to commit has no chance of passing. So basically, we've been standing around for 13 hours. We might as well just been standing around sucking on our teeth. Now, I'd like to ask for order in this chamber. At least we can have that.
There'll be order, please.
Mr. President, in this bill, $1 billion is set aside to be spent by September 30th, 2027 to carry out the Defense Production Act. That's it. That's all there is. Now, I'm not a big fan of government-directed industrialization. Government-directed industrialization is when government, with its superior instincts and infallible judgment, decides to pick winners and losers in the private sector. This business gets some money, but you, Ms. Businesswoman, you can't have the money. I'm against that for two reasons. Number one, it's immoral. It's unfair to people who don't get the money, the gift from government. And number two, when government does it, when it picks winners and losers, government consistently picks losers. Now, I was against it in the prior administration. And just recently in my committee, subcommittee, we had a hearing where the prior administration handed out $90 billion in the last 76 days of its administration in gifts and loans to entities in the private sector. And I raised fresh hell. And now we're about to do it again. $1 billion. Now and that's all it says, $1 billion to be spent, period. Now, I have been told that the Secretary of Energy and the Secretary of the Interior are going to decide in their unfettered discretion who's going to get this money in the private sector. And they are both two good men. I know that both of those secretaries, I voted for them. They are total ballers. I love them to death. But when I'm in Washington, I live by this adage: trust in God, but tie up your camel. Trust in God, but tie up your camel. This bill will say they can give these gifts and grants to whomever they want, but Congress has to approve them. Now, about, an hour ago, I got a call from one of my supporters, Mr. President. And you know what he said to me? He said, Kennedy, for your own good, you need to pull down this amendment. You have to pull down this amendment. Kennedy, for your own good, you have to pull down this amendment. And you know what I told him, Mr. President? I said, Scooter, there are only two things I have to do in this world: be cool and die. And I'm not pulling down this amendment. It wasn't right when it was done in the prior administration. It's not right now that we're in charge. This is Congress's job, and by God, we ought to do it, and I reserve my time.
The senator from Vermont.
All right. I support the Kennedy Amendment, but not for the reasons my friend from Louisiana does. I think that there should be some flexibility and there should be some governmental policy that helps our industry. And I do agree that the president should have some power. What I do not believe is that the Congress should be powerless. And that's what we have become, ceding our Article I authority to a chief executive, and I don't care whether it's a Republican or Democrat. The most important branch is the Article I branch because we are the closest to the people. And how is it that we have in this bill $1 billion that goes to an executive to be spent in ways we have no input as to how it will be spent? We have no accountability. We have no way to tell the people we represent how this money is being spent and why. Mr. President, I believe that the biggest threat we have to this democracy is the failure of this Congress to assert its authority and accept its responsibility to make the decisions that the Constitution says is our obligation to do, and that starts with the power of the purse. I support the man from Louisiana in his amendment. I yield the floor.
Mr. President, how much time do I have? Mr. President, I understand my esteemed colleague and I disagree.
Okay. The senator from Louisiana has 30 seconds, and the senator from South Carolina has 4 minutes.
Thank you, Scooter. I'm Mr. President. Mr. President, I appreciate my colleague's support. I don't mean any disrespect to anybody. But this town operates on two wrongs, don't make it right, but they do make it even. It's time that Congress have a say in how the money's being spent. And this doesn't say the money can't be spent. It just says Congress gets to approve it.
Mr. President, I really like my good friend from the great state of Louisiana. And Scooter's cousin Bubba called me recently. And I got to tell you, that there's no doubt in my mind that the importance of the Defense Production Act is undeniable. And specificity is a necessary component for us to have our oversight. And that is why this administration, unlike the last administration, has committed to making sure that we understand how the resources in the DPA will be spent. We have that commitment on a quarterly basis to receive the necessary information so that we understand with great clarity and transparency how the dollars within the DPA will be spent. But here's what we also know, that we remain reliant on China for critical minerals. Here's what we know, that the United States of America, the city on the hill, remains dependent on foreign powers for our necessary resources. We are not self-reliant in areas that matter the most to the American people and, frankly, to America's future. Now, you can think of this as just hyperbole, but the fact of the matter is clear when you look back to recent issues like COVID and PPE. We were begging China to help the American people, Mr. President. We were begging China for medicine, masks. We cannot allow this great nation to be dependent on other nations. We must become more self-reliant. And in the spirit of self-reliance, this administration, whom I will say, I trust President Trump. I trust his word to produce the results we need for this nation, to make sure that we are self-reliant, and I trust the president to produce the information that will satisfy my good friend, Senator Kennedy. But let me close with this. We need the DPA, and we need the funding at the levels requested. We must make sure we always have the resources to produce for ourselves if there's another COVID. In the same way that we use the DPA to build levees and flood walls after Hurricane Katrina, we need to make sure we have the resources in place for natural emergencies. In the same way that the DPA was used to help protect service members who were deployed overseas from IEDs, we need the DPA. So, Mr. President, I ask my colleagues to vote no on this amendment. The pending amendment does not produce a change in outlays of revenues. I raise a point of order under Section 313B1A of the Congressional Budget Act of 1974.
The Senator from Louisiana.
Excuse me, Mr. President.
Take your time.
Thank you, sir. Pursuant to Section 904 of the Congressional Budget Act of 1974, I move to waive the point of order, reminding the body that I'm not striking the spending. I'm just asking Congress to approve it.
The next day.
Mr. President, as you know, when we passed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, we capped state and local taxes at $10,000. I liked it then, I like it now. The bill before us dramatically raises that cap. I think it's a mistake. I think it's bad policy. But I realize that my instincts are not infallible. Some people don't realize that. But mine aren't. And for that reason, I respect this entire body. And I respect everybody in it. And I don't think my intellect is superior. And I don't think my instincts are infallible. For that reason, I ask to withdraw my amendment whatever the hell the number was. What you do is what you believe, and everything else is just cottage cheese. I've been here 10 years, every one of those 10 years, but especially in the last 100 days, since President Trump was reelected and started talking about reducing spending, I've listened to all of my Republican colleagues encourage the president and say, that's great, we've got to reduce spending, we've got to reduce spending. Well, here's your chance. Here's your chance. It's gut check time. You either believe in reducing spending or you don't. You either support spending porn or you don't. Today, Mr. President, as you know, we're going to start talking about, put up the first one. We're going to start talking about the rescission package. And I want to talk about that for a few minutes. As you know, Mr. President, under our Constitution, Congress passes a budget. We send that budget to the President of the United States, whomever that might be, and the President executes or implements our budget. Close that door for me, please. And the President implements that budget. On occasion, under federal statute, the President has the authority, after we have passed a budget in Congress, to look at the budget and say, you know, I don't need all this money to accomplish the goals that Congress established and instructed me to accomplish. And so the President can contact us and say, Congress, I would like you to rescind some of the spending in the budget that you sent to me. It's called a rescission bill or a rescission package. President Trump has sent us a rescission bill or a rescission package asking the United States Congress to cut the budget by roughly $9 billion. And that's what we're going to start voting on today. Now, $9 billion is a lot of money, except when you compare it to the overall federal budget. $9 billion, despite the fact that it's a bucket load of money, is 1/10 of 1% of the federal budget. 1/10 of 1% of the federal budget. It gives you an idea of how big the federal budget is. I think most people, most adults anyway, understand that in life, what you say doesn't really matter. What you say doesn't really matter. It's what you do that demonstrates what you believe. And that's certainly true in politics. And that's certainly true in Washington, D.C. Ignore what anybody in Washington, D.C. says. Ignore it. If you want to understand their behavior, look at their behavior. What in Washington, D.C., as in life, what you do is what you believe, not what you say. What you do is what you believe, and everything else is just cottage cheese. Now, President Trump, whether you voted for him or not, whether you like him or not, ran on a platform of reducing the size of government. And the people elected him. And since day one, the president has been very hard, if you've paid attention to the news, he's been working very hard to reduce government spending. And he's reduced a lot. He started out with the DOGE program with Mr. Elon Musk. Mr. Musk, of course, has left, but the quest to reduce government spending, wasteful government spending, which I call spending porn, continues. Every Republican in the United States Senate has voiced approval of what the president has done. Every Republican, every one of my colleagues, myself included, has said to the president, "Attaboy, Mr. President, go get them. Keep issuing those executive orders. Reduce the spending. We're spending too much money. We've got a $37 trillion debt. Keep going, Mr. President." And the president has, but he's been doing it through executive order. There's only so much you can do through executive order. An executive order issued by a president expires when the president's no longer in office. The only way to permanently reduce spending is to have Congress act. And that's what the president's asking us to do in this rescission bill. What you do is what you believe, and everything else is just cottage cheese. The rescission package that the president has sent over is we're going to start considering it today. And after listening, in some cases for years, but certainly for the last 100+ days since President Trump's been in office, after listening to my Republican colleagues talk about the importance of reducing spending, it's gut check time. It is gut check time. Because what you do is what you believe, not what you say. And now my colleagues and I have an opportunity to really support the president. Now, I don't know if this bill is going to pass. I do not know if it's going to pass. I mean, I've heard a lot of wailing and gnashing of teeth and whining, and civilization's going to melt if we cut 0.1% of the budget, and that's coming from some of my Democratic colleagues. They're entitled to their point of view, but I want to put this in context. After all of us on my side of the aisle telling the world that we need to reduce spending, if we vote against this rescission package and refuse to reduce spending by 0.1% of the budget, we ought to hide our heads in a bag. We ought to hide our heads in a bag. Now, what kind of spending is the president asking us to reduce, to eliminate? That's important, because not all government spending is wasteful, but a lot of it is. That's why I call it spending porn. I'm going to read you some of the appropriations that the president is asking us to eliminate from the current budget. And you be the judge. Let the American people decide. The president is asking us to eliminate $5.1 million of taxpayer money in the American budget and the federal budget that is there to, quote, strengthen the resilience of queer global movements. The president is asking us to rescind $6 million for media organizations and civic life for Palestinians. The president, in light of our $37 trillion budget deficit, is asking us to reduce a program in the amount of $3.9 million for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and intersex population in the Western Balkans. The president is suggesting that we eliminate a program, $1 million for voter ID programs in Haiti. This is your money, folks. The president is asking us to reduce the budget by $3 million, which is appropriated for, quote, sexual reproductive health in Venezuela. $3 million for circumcision, vasectomies, and condoms in Zambia. I didn't make this stuff up. It's in the budget. $3 million for Sesame Street in Iraq. $833,000 for transgender people, sex workers, and their clients in Nepal. $882,000 for social media mentorship in Serbia and Belarus. $3.6 million for pastry cooking classes, cyber cafes, and dance focus groups for male prostitutes in Haiti. How many Americans, Mr. President, do you think we should be spending their money to fund male prostitutes in Haiti? But there it is in our budget, bigger than Dallas, and the president is saying, cut it out. $6.2 million for Venezuelan migrants in Colombia, $500,000 to buy Rwanda electric buses. I love Rwanda. If they want electric buses, they've got a budget. $300,000 for a pride parade in Lesotho. $300,000 for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex advocacy in Uganda. $500,000 for biodiversity in Peru. I could keep going. I could go the rest of the day and the night. Now, I know what you're thinking. How in God's name, on God's green earth, did this spending porn get in the federal government's budget? Why would Congress put it there? Well, I'm going to tell you why. We didn't. When we pass a budget, we pass budgets based on programs or agendas or line items. We don't put in there that we'd like to spend $5.1 million strengthening the resilience of queer global movements. We appropriate money by agency or line item. For example, we might appropriate money for the Economic Support Fund. Or if you look at our budget, you'll see money appropriated for the United States Institute of Peace. And if you look at our budget, you'll see money that Congress has appropriated for migration and refugee assistance. And then this money goes to the bureaucracy. And the bureaucracy takes the money that we have appropriated, for example, to the Economic Support Fund, and they decide to give it to their friends, usually non-governmental organizations, to fund these nonsensical items that I just spent a few minutes reading. Congress didn't vote to spend $3 million on sexual reproductive health in Venezuela. We voted for a program that the bureaucrats took and spent on sexual health, reproductive health in Venezuela. That's not an excuse, but I get that question all the time. Why did Congress vote to do this? We didn't. The bureaucracy did. It's a giant rogue beast. But the point is, Trump caught it, and his people caught it, and the president is saying, get rid of it. We would be better off. All these programs of spending porn, we'd be better off taking this money and spending it on tax, on scratch tickets and blackjack. We'd be better off taking all of this money that I just talked about and spending it on scratch tickets and blackjack. At least taxpayers might have a chance of getting a return. That's how out of control this is. But if you listen to some of my colleagues, oh my God, if we cut $9 billion civilization, if we cut this spending porn, civilization's going to melt. Now, there's one other thing in our budget that the president's asking us to cut. He's asking us to cut a little over $1 billion for what I will call public broadcasting. When I say public broadcasting, I'm talking about the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. I'm talking about the Public Broadcasting Service, or PBS. I'm talking about National Public Radio, NPR as we call it. We spend anywhere from $500 to $600 million a year on public broadcasting. Why do we do that? Well, we started doing it years ago, at least 50 years ago, a time when there were only 3 television stations and a few radio stations and newspapers. And a lot of folks in rural areas, they didn't get the television stations. They didn't get any news at all. They might live far enough away from a major city so they didn't even have a daily newspaper. So Congress said, you know, we want everybody to know what's going on in the world. We're going to start public broadcasting, and we're going to give them money every year. And they won't have to run ads because we're going to spend taxpayer money to give to these radio stations and television stations. Well, that was 50 years ago. Today, American people have access to all forms of media: streaming, cable TV, network TV, TikTok, Twitter, newspapers, those that are left. No one's in a news desert anymore. So why are we spending money on public broadcasting? $500 million a year. Now, the other factor, it's undeniable that public broadcasting has become political. Unless you've been a huge disappointment to your parents, you understand, if you listen to public broadcasting, that it's representing today one political point of view. The president of public broadcasting, no one would mistake her for Walter Cronkite, I can assure you. Her name is Catherine Mayer. This is her position. She's supposed to be delivering the news objectively, but this is what she has said. Trump is a deranged, racist sociopath. The president and CEO of NPR thinks that America is, quote, addicted to white supremacy. She has denounced the use of words boy and girl. She says that's, quote, erasing language for non-binary people. She contends that the United States was founded on the basis of, quote, black plunder and white democracy. That's who's running the show over there. She's entitled to her beliefs. This is America. You're entitled to believe what you want. And NPR and PBS and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting are entitled to publish and broadcast what they publish, but not on the taxpayer's dime. When we owe $37 trillion, and we really owe that money, we have no business spending $500 million a year giving it to any form of media. We don't fund CNN. We don't fund Fox News. We don't fund newspapers. Why are we funding PBS and NPR and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting? And all the president is saying, I don't want you to do that anymore, Congress. I don't want you to fund any media, any form of media. PBS, for example, has a right to publish what they want, but Congress shouldn't give them taxpayer money to do it. Let them go raise money in the private sector, and the president's right. The president is absolutely right. And that's all this rescission bill is going to do, Mr. President. It's going to bring a little bit of sanity back to our appropriations process. I'm going to end on this note, Mr. President. I'm going to end as I began. What you do is what you believe, and everything else is just cottage cheese. I've been here 10 years, every one of those 10 years, but especially in the last 100 days, since President Trump was reelected and started talking about reducing spending, I've listened to all of my Republican colleagues encourage the president and say, that's great, we've got to reduce spending, we've got to reduce spending. Well, here's your chance. Here's your chance. It's gut check time. You either believe in reducing spending or you don't. You either support spending porn or you don't. We're going to find out who does and who doesn't here in about 3 or 4 hours. Mr. President, I yield the floor. I'm going to say it again. It's like asking a nun about advice on sex. CBO's not telling us the full story. Yeah, they're going to lose their Medicaid. They're not qualified for Medicaid. They're cheating. I want to talk about the Medicaid portion of our reconciliation bill, which the president calls our one big, beautiful bill. And I want to talk about the rest of the story. Now, the Congressional Budget Office is a bipartisan entity, as you know, Mr. President, that advises us on fiscal and financial matters. And I appreciate their good work. A lot of smart people over there. The CBO, as we call it, has issued a report that says, as a result of our reconciliation bill, the so-called One Big Beautiful Bill, that 10.5 million Americans are going to be thrown off Medicaid. Let me say that again. CBO says that as a result of the One Big Beautiful Bill, 10.5 million Americans are going to be thrown off the Medicaid rolls as a result of our bill. And I don't want to be unfair to CBO, but sometimes CBO makes these statements and they don't give you the context in which they're making the statements. If you say we're going to throw 10.5 million people off of Medicaid and don't explain in detail why they come to that conclusion, that's not fair. You're not getting the full story. You're not getting reliable information. That would be like asking a nun for advice about sex. So let me tell you the other half of the story. I talked about this last week a little bit. Of the 10.5 million people that CBO says we're throwing off of Medicaid, they weren't eligible for Medicaid in the first place. I'll say that again. CBO says we're throwing 10.5 million people off of Medicaid. They weren't eligible for Medicaid in the first place. I talked about this a little bit last week. For example, the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services just came out a report with a report of those 10.5 million people that we're throwing off of Medicaid. 2.8 million of them are double dipping. They're double dipping. That's illegal. That's a violation of the rules. That means that a person is signed up. I'm from Louisiana. That means some people are signed up in both Louisiana and Mississippi, for example. You can't double dip. And the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services also found that of that 2.5 million people, 1.6 million of them are double dipping by joining Medicaid and Obamacare. So yeah, they're going to lose their Medicaid. They should. That double dipping costs us $14 billion a year. $140 billion over 10 years. We think in 10-year cycles. That's money that we could use to help people who really deserve Medicaid. So yeah, my friends at CBO, those people are going to lose their Medicaid. Did I mention that they weren't entitled to it in the first place? Now, point two, the reason that the main determinant for Medicaid is income. It's not the only one. The main determinant is income. States are not supposed to sign up people for Medicaid who make too much money. And I regret to say this. I don't know why, but it's human nature. Some people don't tell the truth. Under President Biden, he encouraged the states not to check income eligibility. Just take everybody's word for it. Well, you know, you've probably heard me say this before, but I trust people. But I also, when I play poker, I play with friends. They're good friends of mine, but I always cut the cards. I believe in the old adage, you know, trust in God, but tie up your camel anyway. If the president sends a message to the states, don't worry about checking if people are making too much money, guess what? Some people are going to cheat, and they do. I wish they didn't, but they do. Back in my state of Louisiana, our legislative auditor, Louisiana legislative auditor, which audits all the spending in the state, found that they did an exhaustive audit of our Medicaid program. They found back in 2019 that 1,600 people had been signed up for Medicaid, making over $100,000 a year. 1,600 people making over $100,000 a year. Yes, CBO, they're going to lose their Medicaid. They weren't entitled to it in the first place. The legislative auditor went on to point out that Louisiana paid $85.5 million in Medicaid payments for patients who weren't eligible for coverage because they made too much money. And my legislative auditor in Louisiana, we have a lot of people on Medicaid. He couldn't go through the numbers for each and every one of them, so he had to do a statistical sample. And he listed, I won't show you the list of all of them. You could stand on the thing and paint the ceiling. But he found, for example, on our Medicaid rolls in Louisiana, someone making $111,785. Here's another person on Medicaid making $126,284. Another making $104,921. Another making $114,797. This is Louisiana. Our median family income is only $56,000. These folks aren't qualified for Medicaid. They're taking money away from people who deserve it. So yes, CBO, who on this issue is giving us their advice, I'm going to say it again. It's like asking a nun about advice on sex. CBO's not telling us the full story. Yeah, they're going to lose their Medicaid. They're not qualified. for Medicaid. They're cheating. Let me talk about a third way that CBO is misleading us. And I'm not saying CBO is doing it intentionally. Some may say otherwise, but I'm not saying that. I'm just saying they need to explain their answer. If you say we're throwing 10.5 million people off Medicaid, you got to give us the rest of the story. It's not fair to just take that out of context. Technically, they may be right. But did I mention, I can't remember if I mentioned this, these 10.5 million people weren't qualified to get Medicaid in the first place. Now, we also put in our reconciliation bill, as the President calls it, the big, beautiful bill, a work requirement. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes the best way to get back on your feet is to get off your ass. Now, the American people are the most generous people in the world. We spend trillions of dollars helping our neighbors. In our country, if you are hungry, we will feed you. If you're homeless, we will house you. If you're too poor to be sick, we will pay for your doctor. That's why we have Medicaid. That's why we have Medicare. But those who can work should work. Our social programs were not meant to be parking lots. They were meant to be bridges. Sometimes, it's not always. If you're disabled, you should be on Medicaid. If you're too poor, you should be on Medicaid. But we've got a lot of people on Medicaid, we're not sure exactly how many, who could work. They choose not to. So when we passed this bill, my Democratic friends opposed us every step of the way. But we passed, over their objections, a work requirement. Now, if you're on Medicaid, the expansion part of Medicaid, I don't want to digress here, but if you sign up on the expansion part of Medicaid, if you are 19 to 64 years old, if you're not disabled, so I'm not talking about a mother with a sick child in her arms. If you're 19 to 64, if you're not disabled, if you're healthy, and you don't have a child at home under 14, we're saying we'll give you Medicaid, but you've got to work. Not 40 hours a week, 80 hours a month. For 80 hours a month in return for the free medical care, you've got to go try to get a job. You can go to worker training or you can do community service. And hopefully, you'll become gainfully employed and you won't need Medicaid. Because a person without a job is not healthy, he's not happy, and he's not free. We don't know exactly how many people are on the Medicaid expansion who can work but aren't working. There have been some estimates. I've seen them all over the map. I was looking at one in The Economist recently. They estimate that 6% of the 71 million people on Medicaid are able-bodied and could work but choose not to. That's 6 million people. That's 6 million people. If the average amount spent per person on Medicaid is $9,000 a year. So if we could get all of those 6 million people to work, and we'll help them find a job, we'd save $54 billion a year. That's $500 billion a year over a 10-year period. So yes, CBO, it's true that if someone is covered by the work requirement and they say, I don't want to work, I choose not to work, then they're going to lose their Medicaid. And again, we're not talking about somebody disabled or somebody pregnant. We're not talking about a mother with 3 young children. We're talking about able-bodied adults, 19 to 64. They're healthy, and they don't have kids at home. All we're saying is, come join the American dream and get a job. So yes, CBO, they'll lose their Medicaid. They weren't eligible for it in the first place. So I just want to say to my friends at CBO, I don't mean any disrespect. I don't. They're really smart people. But when you're going to throw these numbers around, like 10.5 million people are going to be thrown off Medicaid, you ought to explain why. So the CBO report, as far as I'm concerned, is all salt and no tequila. They don't tell us why 10.5 million people are going to lose their Medicaid. And unless you have an opium habit, you'll see, if you drill down and understand and try to understand, that those 10.5 million people, God bless them, but they weren't eligible for Medicaid in the first place. And these reforms that we're making to Medicaid are going to be able to provide much more money for the disabled Americans, the truly impoverished Americans, the truly sick Americans, the children who are too poor to be sick in our country. We're going to take this money that we're saving and give them the quality health care they deserve. And even after all these reforms, guess what? Hope you're listening, CBO. We aren't cutting Medicaid. Even after all these reforms, Medicaid's going to go up 20% over the next 10 years. And that's the rest of the story, Mr. President. My work here is done. I yield the floor to my good friend, Harvard graduate. He went to Harvard. You know that, Mr. President? Smart as a whip. Mind like a steel trap, Senator Tom Cotton. Mr. President, this is a photograph of the alien from the movie Alien. This is what you could end up looking like if you eat some of the raw, frozen shrimp being sent to the United States by other countries. Now, let me tell you what I'm talking about. In late August, the FDA found that raw frozen shrimp from Indonesia was being sold in Walmart, specifically in Walmart stores in Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Louisiana, Missouri, Mississippi, Ohio, Oklahoma, Pennsylvania, Texas, and West Virginia. It was being sold under the Walmart label called the Great Value label. If you eat it, how could you end up looking like the alien in the Alien? Because the shrimp was radioactive. I kid you not. It had a radioactive isotope in it called cesium-137. It'll kill you. Even if it doesn't turn you into the alien if you eat this stuff, I guarantee you'll grow an extra ear. That was bad enough. Obviously, the FDA issued a recall. A few days later, it happened again. The FDA and NOAA, which I'll talk about in a second, found that there were 26,460 packages of shrimp cocktail and 18,000 bags of frozen cooked shrimp being sold once again at Walmart and at Kroger's throughout the United States, containing the same radioactive isotope. How could this happen in America? This is unconscionable. I'll tell you how. Because that shrimp from other countries, which don't abide by the same rules that we abide by in America, which if you eat it will may turn you into the alien, and at a minimum will cause you to grow an extra ear. It's not being inspected. It's supposed to be. It's supposed to be inspected by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. We call it NOAA. It's part of the Department of Commerce. And yes, they're inspecting some of it, about 1%. On a good day, 2%. The United Kingdom inspects 50% of the foreign seafood coming into its nation. Even China does a better job than the United States of America. This is unconscionable, Mr. President. There's no excuse for it. Secretary Bergen loves this thing. He loves this idea like the devil loves sin. And he has the right to his opinion. But here's my advice. Life is hard. Life is hard. But it's a lot harder when you're stupid. I want to talk today, Mr. President, about the owls. There are 19 species or kinds of owls in the United States. Did you know that? 19. I want to talk about two of them. The spotted owl and the barred owl. That's barred, B-A-R-R-E-D. Both of them are God's creatures. I also want to talk today, Mr. President, and you'll understand what I mean in a moment, about the federal government's proclivity, repeated proclivity, to do the dumbest thing possible that won't work. Now, the federal government, which can't even deliver the mail when it has the address right there on the front, and more specifically, the Department of Interior has promulgated a rule. And this rule says that unless Congress stops them, they're going to hire hunters right here to kill 453,000 barred owls. There are only 4 million in the United States, but the Department of Interior wants to kill 453,000 mama barred owls, daddy barred owls, and baby barred owls, because the Department of Interior says that the barred owl is a better hunter than the spotted owl. The Department of Interior is not saying the barred owl is eating the spotted owl. The Department of Interior isn't saying that the barred owl is hurting the spotted owl. The Department of Interior says it wants to kill over 10% of the barred owl population because the barred owl is a better hunter than the spotted owl, and they want to tip the scales of nature in favor of the spotted owl, even though the spotted owl is not on the endangered species list. My resolution, which will be voted on tomorrow, will stop this nonsense. First, I want to talk a little bit more about the barred owl, and in doing so, I'll talk a little bit about its cousin, the spotted owl. As I said, they're both God's creatures. This is a barred owl. It's beautiful. If you've ever seen a barred owl, it has very, very soulful eyes. Their feathers are incredibly soft. It's called a barred, B-A-R-R-E-D, because of the bars that run across here, as opposed to a spotted owl. The barred owl, 10% of which our brainiacs at the Department of Interior want to kill, has been around for 11,000 years. Sometimes the barred owl is called a hoot owl. That may be the term you know it by best. The barred owl is about 2 feet long. It's got incredible eyes. Man, it can see. It's like Superman or Superwoman. It's got incredible eyes and incredible hearing. The barred owl, like the spotted owl, it's nocturnal. They come out at night. They hide during the day, and they come out at night. And the barred owl is a great hunter, great hunter. The barred owl eats mice. The barred owl eats squirrels. The barred owl eats snakes. The barred owl eats lizards. The barred owl eats spiders. Barred owl even eats bats. The barred owl lives, as does the spotted owl for that matter, in old growth forests. In fact, I have a pair of barred owls that live in the forest behind my house. They're great. They always come in pairs, about which I'll talk in a second. In fact, you can attract barred owls. Many people do, by building what's called a nest box. And you can have barred owls come and live if you live near a forest. If you want to know how, if you're not handy like me and you want to know how to build a nest box, just go to YouTube. Barred owls marry for life. They mate for life. And when a male barred owl is courting a female barred owl, I've seen videos, it's really cool. The male barred owl courts a female by bowing. The male barred owl bows, and it opens its wings up a little bit. Doesn't want to be intimidating to the female, not full blast, but it opens its legs up a little bit. And the barred owl wobbles its head back and forth, side to side. And if the female is impressed, the female says, "I do." And they stay married the rest of their lives together. That's why you see them in pairs. They have babies once a year, generally 2 to 5 babies. Well, I can't go there. These are two of the babies that the Department of Interior wants to kill. They're going to pay the same price, by the way, to the hunter to kill the babies as they are to kill the mama. They don't care. They just want to kill them all. When the babies are little bitty when they're born, they're not covered in feathers. Little babies are covered in soft white down. They don't start getting feathers until about 2 weeks. And the mama barred owl stays with the babies for the first few weeks. Sometimes the babies, like senators, fall out of the nest as they start exploring around, and the mama or the daddy barred owl, unless the daddy's out hunting for food, has to get them back into the nest. The babies learn to fly after about 10 weeks. Now, what does this have to do with the spotted owl, which is also one of God's creatures? The barred owl is native. It's originally from the eastern United States and southeastern Canada. It's existed there 11,000 years. But over the past 100 years, 100 years is just the blink of an eye in time. Over the past 100 years, the Northeast has gotten more and more crowded. And the old growth forests that the barred owl lives in have been cut down. and subdivisions built. So the barred owl, as happens all the time in nature, has started moving west, and it's moving west, and it's moving west. And now the barred owl is entering Washington State, Oregon, Northern California, and British Columbia in Canada. Well, that's where the spotted owl lives. The spotted owl also lives in old-growth forest, but not exactly in the old-growth forest in the west is the same place as the barred owl is. The spotted owl prefers an old-growth forest at a higher elevation. The barred owl is a better hunter. It's slightly bigger than a spotted owl. The barred owl is a better hunter than the spotted owl. Now, let me say it again, because there's been a lot of confusion about this. The barred owl doesn't hunt the spotted owl. In fact, many times a barred owl and a spotted owl will get married. I know they're cousins, but that doesn't matter. They're distant cousins, and sometimes they get married, and they interbreed. So this isn't a question of one animal killing another. The Department of Interior is mad at the barred owl because the barred owl's a better hunter. The barred owl is just a better hunter. That's just the way it is. You know, just like the Senate president is better looking than me, I accept that. That's the way God made us. God just made the barred owl a better hunter. And the Department of Interior is all up in arms. They say this is threatening the spotted owl. Now, the spotted owl isn't on the endangered species list, but they say this isn't fair. The barred owl is a better hunter than the spotted owl, and that's causing the spotted owl's population to decrease. So the Department of Interior, in its infinite wisdom, has come up with DEI for owls. They've come up with quotas for owls. The barred owl, because nature, God, whatever you believe in, made them better hunters, now has to give up its rights, has to give up its life, because the spotted owl is not as good of a hunter. Now, as I mentioned, the spotted owl and the barred owl don't always live in the same place. Out west, the spotted owl prefers higher elevations than the barred owl, but they do, it's undeniable, they compete for food and they both live in old-growth forests. Let me tell you something. The Department of Interior doesn't like to admit this, Mr. President. The spotted owl population was declining even before the barred owl decided to move. You know why? It had nothing to do with food. It had nothing to do with the barred owl. It had to do with the same thing happening on the West Coast that has happened on the East Coast. Many of the old-growth forests have been cut down to make way for more people. And you might have noticed we've had a few forest fires. And they have been causing the population of the spotted owl to be reduced. Not to the point of endangered. The Interior Department just says they're threatened. That's the problem with the spotted owl. It's not the barred owl. Now, this regulation that I'm trying to overturn was promulgated under President Biden's Department of Interior. Okay? But the Department of Interior, I want to make this clear, under President Trump, has embraced this rule. They think this is the greatest rule, this is the greatest idea they've ever heard of. They think it tastes like pumpkin pie to them. In fact, I got a call from Secretary Burgum, who I love and respect. He was mad as a mama wasp. Pull down that regulation. He accused me of slandering the Trump administration. I'm not slandering the Trump administration. This was a President Biden regulation. Now, Now, I was polite with the secretary, but I told him he was confused. He needed to call somebody. He had the wrong person in line. The secretary needed to call somebody who cared what he thought. Because I think he's wrong. I think he's wrong. I think he and the other members of the administrative state of the Department of Interior decided to play God. And they're wrong for at least 5 reasons. Number one, their plan, their brainiac plan, which looks like it was designed by a heroin addict with a socket wrench, won't work. It won't work. Now, let me tell you what they're going to do. They want to hire hunters. They want to hire Elmer here to go out at night with a flashlight and shoot the barred owls. Now, this is night, okay? The barred owl lives about 40 feet up off the ground in a tree. You know what else lives about 40 feet up off the ground in a tree? The spotted owl. You think that these cowboys who are going disco because they have a federal contract are going to be able to always tell the difference between a barred owl and a spotted owl? They're going to shoot them both and let God sort them out because they're being paid. Look, I'm a duck hunter. And a lot of times when I hunt ducks, I'm not a big hunter, but I like to duck hunt and dove hunt. I eat what I kill. But a lot of times when I'm duck hunting, there are different points for different species of duck. I can't tell which duck is which. I've passed up shots before because I thought it might be a mallard when I can't kill any more mallard. You think these cowboys that they're going to hire from the private sector, going out there with the little flashlights, old Elmer here, with his little red hat, in the middle of the night with a flashlight, are going to tell the difference or care the difference between a barred owl and a spotted owl? No. They're going to shoot them both. Number two, the other reason it won't work is the spotted owls are not stupid. Once you start shooting at them, they're going to move up into Canada. The Canadians aren't dumb enough to do something like this. They're going to move up into Canada. And they're going to wait until the shooting stops. And then they're going to come back down. So what have we accomplished? Have we done anything for the spotted owl? No. Number three, I've been through this reg stem to stern. I can't find where this regulation prohibits Elmer Fudd from going out there and using lead shot. Now, when we hunt ducks, you can't use lead shot, you use steel shot. You know why? Because a lot of times other birds and other animals will eat the lead shot and they die from it. So these cowboys are going to go out, if they're not prohibited from using lead shot, yeah, they're going to kill some barred owls and spotted owls. They're going to end up killing eagles and hawks and other wildlife using their lead shot. The second reason this won't work, let me say it again. The barred owls aren't the problem. The problem is that we're losing old growth forest in the west, which is the habitat of the spotted owl. And it's naturally occurring as more people move to Washington and Northern Carolina and Oregon, and we have wildfires that have burned our forests. Don't go pick on the barred owl. You can kill every barred owl there is, and it's not going to help the spotted owl if you don't maintain the appropriate habitat. Number three, this is going to be incredibly expensive. This comes under the theme of let's do the dumbest thing possible that won't work. Our Department of Interior has already issued one contract. I don't know how they got the authority to do it, but back in 2004, they issued a contract to a private vendor, Elmer here, to go kill 1,500 barred owls. I guess they wanted to test it out. You know what they paid? $3,000 a bird. $3,000 for a mama barred owl, $3,000 for a daddy barred owl, and $3,000 for a baby barred owl. give me a break. And now they're going to go out and kill 453,000? Over $1 billion. Over $1 billion. It's not their money, but it's taxpayer money on a plan that won't even work. Here's what one person from the Department of Interior said. In a rare moment of candor, he might have gotten fired, but he's a wildlife and fisheries agent. He told the press, I'm going to quote, he said, I think all we can really do is try our best to provide a habitat for spotted owls, and in the long run, we're just going to have to let the two species work it out. Final reason this is a bad reg, and then I'm going to wrap this up. I know the bureaucrats at the Department of Interior. I realize this. They're smarter and they're more virtuous than you and I are. I get that. But who appointed them God? Who appointed them God? Barred owls are expanding their habitat because the forests in the east have been cut down. That's called adaptive range expansion. And you know what? Whether you believe in God or nature or whatever, that happens every single day in our ecosystem. It's a naturally occurring ecological phenomenon. It's a core behavioral characteristic of mammals. All the barred owls are doing, they're not hurting anybody, they're just doing what nature teaches them to do. We're going to change nature. We're going to control our environment to this extent. We're going to pass DEI for owls. We're going to pass quotas for owls. Spotted owls, good. Barred owls, bad. But the barred owls won't lose their constitutional rights. They'll kill them. They're going to kill 453 of them, dead as Jimmy Hoffa. Give me a break. I cannot think. This attempt, this is foolish, this is reckless, this is expensive, it's unsupported by evidence, it's unnecessary, and it won't work. And I cannot think of a better example of the arrogance, the hubris of the federal administrative state. This ranks right up there. If we let them go through with this will rank right up there with those $10,000 Department of Defense toilet seats. Except part of God's creation will already be dead. Ecosystems are like markets. They regulate themselves. Trying to change nature is like trying to have a federal government direct a free enterprise system. It won't work. It never has, and it never will. I don't mean any disrespect to anybody. I don't. I'm not, well, I guess I am calling somebody Elmer and Fudd. I don't know who they're going to hire, but I know they hired a bunch of Elmers and gave them $3,000 a bird, and it didn't work. But this to me is just bone deep, down to the marrow stupid. I have rocks in my driveway that are smarter than this. I do. And here's my advice to my friends of the Department of Interior. And I'm full disclosure. This thing's supported by President Biden's people, and it is supported by President Trump's people. Secretary Bergen loves this thing. He loves this idea like the devil loves sin, and he has the right to his opinion. But here's my advice. Life is hard. Life is hard. But it's a lot harder when you're stupid. Don't do it. Pass my resolution. And let's stop this. Now, let me say it again, Mr. President. I don't hate anybody. This is America. I sure don't hate the Congresswoman. She is entitled to her opinion, but I'm entitled to mine. And she can criticize my policy positions, but I'm entitled to criticize hers. And I'm here to tell you, Mr. President, in front of God and country, based on her policy positions that she's demanding, based on her policy positions that she is demanding, that I just outlined, $1.5 trillion of pure, unadulterated spending porn. Based on that demand, based on her policy positions, the American people are looking at her and saying, this person has single-handedly put an end to dumb blonde jokes. Because that is the craziest thing I've ever heard. Based on her policy positions, $1.5 trillion of this kind of spending porn, the American people are looking at the Congresswoman and saying, with respect, she must be bilingual. She must speak English and stupid. And that's why we're not agreeing to it. The shutdown melodrama continues. I love the smell of melodrama in the morning. It smells like the United States Senate. I said the other day that this shutdown is just further proof that human evolution is a slow, slow process. This shutdown, what you're witnessing now, is just further proof of why it took human beings thousands of years to learn how to stand upright. This shutdown is bone deep, down to the marrow, stupid. Some shutdowns are based on policy. Some shutdowns are based on politics. Some shutdowns are based on a combination of both. This one is pure. It's pure as ivory snow. This shutdown is based on politics. Let me tell you what's going on. I believe in a two-party system, Mr. President. Why? Because two parties create competition. And competition makes all of us better. It does. The Democratic Party, the opposite of my party, the Republican Party, the Democratic Party is competing within itself right now. And there is a distinct wing of the Democratic Party that is winning that competition. If I wanted to use a pejorative expression, I would call it the loon wing of the party. The loon wing of the Democratic Party. Or you might call it the Bolshevik wing of the Democratic Party. I think a more accurate description is to call it the socialist wing of the Democratic Party. I think that's fair. Now, I'm not saying that all of my Democratic friends are socialists. But there is clearly a wing of the Democratic Party that can only be described accurately as the socialist wing of the party. And that party is in ascendancy. That party is in control. Now, my friend Senator Schumer is the leader of the Democrats in the United States Senate. And he, of course, has instructed his colleagues to vote to shut down government. And Senator Schumer has been criticized for that. And I understand. I don't agree with him. I think he made a mistake. But I don't think Senator Schumer is the leader of this effort. I don't. I think Senator Schumer like many of his colleagues, would like to be loved by everybody in the party, and he would like to be loved by the socialist wing of his party. And I do think that's part of what is motivating this shutdown, and that's why I say it's all about politics. But I don't think Senator Schumer is the person in charge, because Senator Schumer is not the leader of the socialist wing of his party. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez is. She's running the show. It was no accident the other day the Congresswoman let it slip. She said, if you really want to negotiate an end of this shutdown, come see me. Come see me. And I think any fair-minded person has to look right now and say that the two leading members, the quarterback, the two leading members of the socialist wing of the Democratic Party, the quarterback is Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez. Now, her substitute is Senator Bernie Sanders. But I think it's the Congresswoman who's calling these shots. Now, Mr. President, I don't hate anybody. I've said that repeatedly, and I mean it. I like all of my colleagues. I look for grace wherever I can find it. When I say my prayers, I do, every single time. I ask God, don't let me hate, because it's hard sometimes. It's hard up here. But I do. I say, God, don't let me hate. And I certainly don't hate Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez. I want to make that very clear. She has the right to her opinion. She has the right to try to have the socialists take over the Democratic Party. That's the American way. Ironically, I think what she's doing is anti-American, but she has the right as an American to do it, so I don't hate her. But I judge her by her policy. She has her opinion, and I have mine. And I have to judge her candidly by her policy. Here is what the socialist wing of the Democratic Party, led by Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, has said to the American people and to the United States Congress and the Republicans in Congress. If you Republicans don't agree to make the federal government $1.5 trillion, not $1 million, not $1 billion, $1.5 trillion bigger, we're going to shut government down. Well, of course we said no. I'm not going to vote for that. My mother didn't raise a fool. And as I've said before, if she did, it was one of my brothers. I'm never going to vote for that. Now, where do I come up with this figure, $1.5 trillion? Well, the first thing that the socialists and Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez is asking us to do is to repeal the health care reforms in the One Big Beautiful Bill. We just passed them. We just passed them. Here it is, Subtitle B, Health in the One Big Beautiful Bill. Now, we didn't cut Medicaid in the One Big Beautiful Bill. In fact, under our bill, Medicaid is going to increase 2% a year over the next 10 years. Now, what we did by reforming Medicaid, which Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez wants us to reverse, we cut out the waste and the fraud. For example, we found out that there are, no kidding, I'm not just making this up, we found out that there are 2.8 million people on Medicaid who are double dipping in America. They're either signing up for Medicaid in Louisiana and Mississippi, double dipping, or they're signing up for Medicaid in Louisiana and they're signing up for the Obamacare subsidies. That's called cheating. Our bill would put an end to that. And it would save about $140 billion on 10 years. The socialist wing of the Democratic Party and a Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez want us to reverse that. The second thing we did in our health care reforms in the One Big Beautiful Bill is to say you've got to stop lying when you apply for Medicaid. Under President Obama, we had virtually no eligibility checks. People could walk in and the Medicaid folks would say, how much do you make a year? And they could say $30,000 a year. And they'd say, okay, you qualify. Now, I trust people. I've said it before on this floor. I play cards with my friends all the time. They're friends. I cut the cards anyway. We have found, for example, just in Louisiana, we did a statistical sample of the people on Medicaid in Louisiana. Our auditors found 1,600 people on Medicaid making $100,000 a year or more. That's cheating. So our bill put an end to that. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez and the socialist wing of the Democratic Party want us to put it back. They want to let people cheat. What else are the socialists asking for in this $1.5 trillion? Well, they're saying we don't want people who can work to work. We put a provision in our bill that the Congresswoman and the socialist wing of her party want us to take out that says, look, if you're between the ages of 19 and 64 and you're able-bodied, we're not talking about a mother with a sick child in her arms, you're able-bodied, you're perfectly healthy, and you don't have any dependent kids at home, then if you qualify based on income, we'll give you Medicaid, but you have to work. You have to work 20 hours a week or go to school 20 hours a week or do community service 20 hours a week, because the free enterprise system, jobs, have done more to lift people out of poverty than all the social programs put together. That's what's called a work requirement. What's wrong with that? Those who can't work should work. Our welfare programs were meant to be bridges, not parking lots. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez and the socialist wing of her party want us to reverse all of that. What else do they want us to do? Well, they're upset at us over the Affordable Care Act. Now, let me tell you what all this is about with the Affordable Care Act. Under Obamacare, if you are a low-income American, you're entitled to Medicaid. If you are a middle-income American, you have a job, then chances are you get insurance through your employer. Most people do. But if you're in the middle, you make a little more money than the poverty level, but you can't get insurance through your employer, we provide what's called the Obamacare exchanges. So when we talk about the Obamacare subsidies, that's what we're talking about. It's about 24 million people. And it was meant for lower income people. Up until 2019, it was all for low-income people. And then in 2019, without any Republican votes, President Obama said, look, we're in a pandemic. We're going to raise the limit. We're going to say there are no income limits on Obamacare paid for by the taxpayer. We've got 24 million people on Obamacare. When they raised the limits, you can make any amount of money and still get a subsidy. That added about 1.6 million people on Obamacare. Obamacare was meant for people who make from roughly $30,000 a year to $130,000 a year, families of four. Now, because President Biden raised the cap, we've got people making $600,000 a year, $150,000 a year, families making $200,000 a year, getting subsidies from the American taxpayer. Why? Because they said we needed it in the pandemic. The pandemic is over. And that's why the Democrats, when they passed the bill, put in a provision that says at the end of this year, those extra subsidies are going to end. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez says no. Until you agree to let them continue, to let anybody at any income level get subsidies, we're going to shut government down. That's their third demand. And that is part of the $1.5 trillion. And finally, of course, the Congresswoman is saying we want you to give $500 billion, not $500,000, not $500 million, $500 billion. We want you to give $500 billion to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting because we like what they say. Well, we just eliminated money for all forms of media in the Affordable Care Act. Now, those are the demands. Those are the demands. I'll just mention, I'll mention one more. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez got very, very upset, as did the socialist wing of her party, when the president sent over what's called a rescission package. Basically, President Trump just said, we want you to take some stuff out of the budget that we think is wasteful. And we did. And that upset the Congresswoman. She's entitled to be upset if she wants to. But that really upset the socialist wing of the party. And so we took out, and here's what they want us to put back in. We found that under President Biden, they were spending $3 million for circumcisions and vasectomies in Zambia. We took that out. The Congresswoman says, we're going to shut down government until you put that back in. We found $500,000 of American taxpayer money for electric buses in Rwanda. We found $3.6 million for pastry cooking classes and dance focus groups for male prostitutes in Haiti. I kid you not. I'm not making this up. It was in the budget under President Biden. We took it out. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez in the socialist wing, the loon wing of the Democratic Party, says we're going to shut down government until you put it back in. I'll just read you a few more that we took out. They are demanding we put back in. $6 million for media organizations for the Palestinians. $833,000 for transgender people in Nepal. $300,000 for a pride parade in Lesotho. $882,000 for social media and mentorship in Serbia. $4.2 million. We took it out. The Congresswoman and the socialist wing of their party says we've got to put that back in for the open government. $4.2 million for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and intersex people in the Western Balkans and Uganda. I could spend the rest of the afternoon here. We took all that out. It upset Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez. It upset the socialist wing of her party. And now that wing of her party and the Congresswoman are threatening all other Democrats and saying, you've got to shut that government down until we get what we want. And part of what they want is to add this kind of stuff back into the bill. And that's what this fight is all about. We're in the process of negotiating a budget with our Democratic friends. We ran out of time. The cutoff was midnight Tuesday night. That's when the clock struck midnight and the budget ran out. What we had asked for and what we're still asking for is let's continue to negotiate, we meaning the Republicans and the Democrats, for 6 more weeks and try to agree on a budget. That's all we're asking. We're not asking for any additional appropriations, any conditions, any stipulations. All we're asking for is what we call a clean CR. All we're asking for is just further negotiate. And Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, who has done a stellar job in rising to the leadership of her party as a member of the socialist wing. They're about to elect a socialist mayor of New York. I think Mr. Mamdani's going to win. They have said to our request, let's just continue the status quo for 6 more weeks. They said, we'll give you 6 more weeks if you will give us $1.5 trillion. That's what they're demanding. And that's why we're shut down. Now, let me say it again, Mr. President. I don't hate anybody. This is America. I sure don't hate the Congresswoman. She is entitled to her opinion, but I'm entitled to mine. And she can criticize my policy positions, but I'm entitled to criticize hers. And I'm here to tell you, Mr. President, in front of God and country, based on her policy positions that she's demanding, based on her policy positions that she is demanding that I just outlined, $1.5 trillion of pure, unadulterated spending porn. Based on that demand, based on her policy positions, the American people are looking at her and saying, this person has single-handedly put an end to dumb blonde jokes. Because that is the craziest thing I've ever heard. Based on her policy positions, $1.5 trillion of this kind of spending porn, the American people are looking at the Congresswoman and saying, with respect, she must be bilingual. She must speak English and stupid. And that's why we're not agreeing to it. Now, I know every one of my Democratic colleagues, and I know more than half of them know better. They know what we're asking for is reasonable. I'm just asking them to meet us halfway. We're not asking for any additional provisions. They shouldn't ask for any additional provisions. And let us just open back up and continue to negotiate for 6 weeks. Don't be scared of the Congresswoman. Don't be scared of the socialist wing of your party. Let me apologize in advance. Is deeply disgusting. It's deeply disgusting. I mean, it is clown world on steroids. Mr. President, as you well know, the American people are the most generous people in the entire world. In our country, when you are hungry, we feed you. When you are homeless, we house you. When you're too poor to be sick, we'll pay for your doctor. We spend trillions of dollars a year helping our friends and neighbors who are less fortunate than we are. And that's rare in this world. I've been all over our wonderful world. You have too, Mr. President. And in many countries, if you get down on your luck, they'll let you die in a ditch. But not in America. Not in America. We take care of our fellow citizens. But it's expensive. We spend trillions of dollars a year to do this. And that money that we spend didn't just fall from heaven. We thank heaven for it, but it came out of taxpayers' pockets. And we shouldn't lose sight of that fact, Mr. President. Now, that's why I get so irritated. Irritated is the wrong word. Angry. When I find out that people take advantage of the American people's generosity. It makes me want to knee someone in the groin. It just makes me furious. And I think the American taxpayers feel the same way. What I'm about to tell you, Mr. President, let me apologize in advance, is deeply disgusting. It's deeply disgusting. I mean, it is clown world on steroids. And when I first read about this, Mr. President, I read it a second time because I experienced slack-jawed astonishment. And when I read it a second time and I realized it was true, I just wanted to run away screaming. What am I talking about, Mr. President? We have discovered, the federal prosecutors have discovered, that for the last 5 years, there has been massive welfare fraud in the great state of Minnesota. Massive. Over $1 billion of American taxpayer money has been stolen. Just stolen. They can call it fraud, but a better term would be stealing. And this fraud has been centered in the Somali community in Minnesota. Now, I'm not here to criticize the Somali community. I'm here simply to describe what happened. The Somali community in Minneapolis is about 80,000 people. They're centered around Minneapolis. And let me say it again. I'm not here to denigrate the Somali people or people of Somali ancestry just because of the actions of a few. But it is a fact that this $1 billion in welfare fraud occurred almost exclusively in the Somali community in Minnesota and was orchestrated by people with Somali ancestry. That's a fact. Facts aren't racist. Facts are facts. So far, 59 people have been convicted, 86 have been charged, and 78 of them are of Somali ancestry. That's just a fact. Now, what these criminals did they had three very elaborate schemes. The first scheme was centered on supposedly feeding hungry children in the Somali community. A group, a nonprofit run by some people with Somali ancestry. The name of the nonprofit was called Feeding Our Future. Feeding Our Future. Feeding Our Future went to the welfare authorities in the state of Minnesota, which of course was administering federal taxpayer money, and they said, "Look, Feeding Our Children said, Feeding Our Future said, we want to feed hungry children in the Somali community." And the welfare people in state government in Minnesota gave them the money to do that. It started out very small. But the idea was that Feeding the Future, the Somali nonprofit organization, would take this federal taxpayer money, American taxpayer money, and go to businesses, most of which were Somali businesses, in the Somali community and set up feeding sites where they supposedly would take children to get a hot meal. On paper, it sounded great. As I say, it started out very, very small, just a few $1 million. But eventually, it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And more businesses in the Somali community signed up to be feeding sites. And Feeding Our Future, the Somali nonprofit, kept going back to the Social Services Department in Minnesota saying, we need more money, we need more money. And at the height of the fraud, they were spending about $100 million a year. Not over the lifetime of the program, $100 million a year. There's just one problem. There were no hungry children. There were hungry children. They just weren't getting any of the money. And the businesses, many of which were Somali owned, which were getting some money to feed the children from Feeding Our Future, the nonprofit that was quarterbacking this whole thing, they weren't giving any of the money to hungry children. They were spending it. These businesses were spending it on yachts and vacations and jewelry and furniture for their home. That was scheme number one. But it got worse. The second scheme was supposedly to help people who are homeless. Remember I said in America, when you're homeless, we'll house you? Well, that's what they were trying to do in Minnesota. A nonprofit was set up, again, run by someone of Somali ancestry. And this nonprofit went to a bunch of providers who supposedly were going to provide housing. And they told the welfare authorities in Minnesota that they needed millions of dollars to house people who were homeless. And once again, the program started out small. When they started it in 2020, these crooks started it in 2020, they said, we only need $2.6 million. But then in 2021, they said we need $21 million. And in the following years, they said we need $42 million the next year, then $74 million to feed, or rather to house the homeless, then $104 million a year. Not the total scheme, a year. There's just one problem. None of the money was going for housing. None of the money was going to help people who were homeless. These providers and this nonprofit that was coordinating it just put the money in their pocket. But there's more. They came up with a third scheme. This one makes you want to throw up in a potted plant. This one's centered around autistic children. Once again, in this third program, a group of providers, supposedly medical providers, got together and they went to the welfare authorities in Minnesota and said, we need money to help autistic children. You say, well, that's a wonderful thing to do. And then these providers, once the welfare department at the state government in Minnesota gave them the okay, they went out and started recruiting autistic children. You say, well, okay, we have to get the word out somehow. But they couldn't find very many autistic children. So they started going to parents in the Somali community and saying, can we call your child autistic? Can we certify that your child is autistic? If you'll let us do that, we'll pay you a bribe. Anywhere from $400 to $1,500 a child. Now, once again, the program, it didn't start big. These were sophisticated crooks. And its leader was a woman by the name of Asha Farban Hassan. She was also in, by the way, on the feeding of the children scam as well. And as best we can tell, they approached parents only in the Somali community. But once again, they couldn't find enough autistic children, so they bribed the many parents in the community, gave them money to certify that their children were autistic. In the first year, they were clever. They only asked for $3 million. The second year, in 2019, they asked for $54 million. Then in 2020, they went up to $77 million. And then in 2021, they really got greedy. They went to $183 million. And in 22, $280 million. And in 2023, $400 million. All total, in these three fraud schemes, these crooks stole $1 billion of taxpayer money. Here's I started to say worst part, but let me amend it. Equally bad part. You say, well, hello, how could this happen? Why didn't the people in the Department of Social Services and the Welfare Department in state government, when they saw these claims arising, why didn't they say something? Didn't they go out and check these businesses that were supposedly sites to feed homeless children? Didn't they go talk to some of the children and their parents to see if some of the children really were autistic? Didn't the state authorities go out and say, can you show us one of the homes that you're providing to the homeless people? After all, we're spending $1 billion. They didn't, because the politicians wouldn't let them. And the crooks who were setting all this up, they're pretty smart. I'll give you one example. Remember I talked about the nonprofit involved in feeding the so-called hungry children, called Feeding the Future? The rank and file employees in the welfare office started getting suspicious when the claims went up, and they contacted Feeding Our Future. And they said, hey, what's going on here? You know, we're going to start cutting off these claims because it's getting a little bit expensive. And you know what Feeding Our Future did? They threatened the employees. They said, if you cut off our money, they sent them an email, and they did it by phone. They told the state agency that failing to promptly approve new applicants from minority-owned businesses would result in a lawsuit, feeding accusations of racism that would be sprawled across the news. Feeding Our Futures went to the state and said, if you stop giving us this money, we're going to call you racist and we're going to sue you. And you don't want to be in the news. Now, here's what, and you say, well, why didn't the employees do something? They did. They told the people higher up, the people with the flags in their office. And you know what they did? Nothing. You know why? Well, here's what the legislative auditor in Minnesota said. He said that the threat of litigation and the negative press affected how the state politicians use their regulatory power. And here's what a fraud investigator in the Attorney General's office said. She said, there is a perception that, I'm quoting now, that forcefully tackling this issue would cause political backlash from the Somali community, which is a core voting bloc for Democrats. And in fact, one of the other witnesses in the fraud investigation said, look, told the prosecutors, let me just give you a cold dish of truth. The 80,000 voting block of folks with Somali ancestry, you got to have their votes to win in Minneapolis. And if you're a Democrat and you can't win Minneapolis, you can't win in the state. So the politicians did nothing. Don't just take my word for it. And don't blame the state employees. They tried. In fact, recently the state employees, they just said, look, we've had enough. They posted this. These are over several hundred employees from the Minnesota Department of Human Service who administer this program, who just get up every day and go to work and do their job and want to help people. This is what they posted on social media. I'm quoting now, Mr. President. Governor Tim Walz is 100% responsible for massive fraud in Minnesota. I'm sure he wasn't the only one, because this fraud was an open secret. But I'm quoting from what the employee said. Governor Tim Walz is 100% responsible for massive fraud in Minnesota. We let Tim Walz know of fraud early on. That's the employees talking. Hoping for a partnership and stopping fraud, but no, we got the opposite response. Tim Walz systematically retaliated against whistleblowers, using monitoring, using threats, using repression, and did his best to discredit fraud reports. Instead of partnership, we got the full weight of retaliation by Tim Walz and an indifferent mainstream media. It's scary, isolating, and left us wondering who we can return to. And now there are reports coming out, Mr. President. I don't know if they're true, but I know the prosecutors are desperately trying to get the bottom of it. And I don't want to say that this is true, but a report came out in a publication called City Journal, which is published by the Manhattan Institute. And they are alleging that money, part of this $1 billion that was stolen, they are alleging that at least a portion of it went to a terrorist organization in Somalia that we've all heard of. It's notorious. It's an organization called Al-Shabaab. They hate Americans. They're terrorists. They want to kill Americans and drink their blood out of a boot. They were taking a cut, according to this claim. Again, I don't know if it's true, but the prosecutors are trying to get to the bottom of it. Now, there's been a lot of allegations about racism in these reports. They're saying, oh, you're just picking on the Somali community. I'm not. And I don't think the American people are. I think what they're picking on are crooks. They're picking on crooks. Everything I just gave you are facts, Mr. President. Has nothing to do with race. But it is a fact that these $1 billion schemes were cooked up by leaders in the Somali community in Minneapolis and in Minnesota. And it is a fact that most of the businesses that participated in this fraud and this thievery were run by people of Somali ancestry. I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm not saying it's a bad. That's just a fact. And I don't think we ought not to talk about it. And it is a fact that the kickbacks paid to parents to allow their children to be signed up as autistic, in order to get the federal taxpayer money, the parents were of Somali ancestry. It doesn't give me any pleasure to say that, but it is a fact. And it is a fact that the politicians, not the employees, the rank and file employees and the welfare offices, but the politicians in Minnesota let this happen. It is disgusting, Mr. President. Disgusting. We're trying to put together a budget right now. And we've got state officials in Minnesota, because they wanted votes, that are allowing people in their state who were crooks to steal $1 billion from the American taxpayer. Money that could have gone to people who really were homeless, and children who really were hungry, and kids who, through no fault of their own, really were autistic, instead of stolen, a portion of which allegedly was sent to a terrorist organization in Somalia. Man, these people ought to all be put in jail, including the politicians. Makes me want to stick my head in another. I want to talk for a few minutes about money. Money, money, money. People's money. Like you, Mr. President, I've learned a few things in life. I want to mention two. Number one, money does not buy happiness. Number two, poverty does not buy a damn thing. And that's the theme of my few minutes as I talk today. This is about people's money, and it has to do with unredeemed, uncashed savings bonds. Now, Mr. President, you know what I mean when I talk about a bond. Usually when we're talking on the Senate floor, we're talking about Treasury bonds, or Treasury bills, or Treasury notes. I want to talk about a different kind of bond today. Same principle, but a different animal. It's called a savings bond. Savings bonds used to be very, very popular in America, particularly last century, particularly during World War II. They're less popular today because there's so many other ways to earn interest on your money. Though many people still believe in savings bonds. I do. It's a great way to invest your money. What am I talking about when I say a savings bond as opposed to a treasury bond? Well, let's take the example of one particular savings bond. It's called a double E U.S. savings bond. A savings bond is just a loan to the federal government. Let's suppose I have $1,000 and I want to loan it to the federal government because the federal government will pay me interest. I can go to the federal government and say, I'm going to loan you $1,000. And the federal government would say, thank you very much. Here's your double E U.S. savings bond. And this is how it would work. The federal government would guarantee me that after 20 years, my $1,000 would double. So I would hand them meaning the government, $1,000, and 20 years from now, I would get back $2,000. And if I didn't really need my money after 20 years, I could let the government keep it, loan it to the government, if you will, for another 10 years. And they would continue paying me interest. Now, there are two things you need to note about what I just talked about, this double E savings bonds. So, number one, unlike a regular corporate bond, when I loan that $1,000 to the federal government and get back a double E U.S. savings bond, I don't get periodic interest payments. The interest accrues and it compounds. But when I give the government $1,000, I don't get quarterly interest payments, but at the end of the 20 years, I get back $2,000. Roughly in today's market, I'm making about 2.7% a year. But it's very, very safe. If you believe in the sovereignty of the federal government, our federal government being part of the wealthiest country in all of human history, then it's a pretty safe investment. The other thing you need to note about this savings bond, in addition to the fact that they don't pay me periodic interest, I get all my interest when I get my principal back at the end of 20 years, is that at some point, in the example I just gave, after 30 years, the federal government stops paying me interest. Interest stops accruing. So if I give the federal government, loan the federal government $1,000, and after 20 years, interest is accrued. If I want to, I can redeem my savings bond, and they'll give me $2,000. Maybe I say, okay, I'll re-up another 10 years and continue to earn interest. But 30 years is the limit. After 30 years, if I don't redeem my bond, I'm loaning money to the federal government interest-free. And that would be a dumb thing to do. But not everybody redeems their bonds. A lot of people don't. More people than you would imagine. Life comes at us pretty fast. You know, you buy a savings bond, or maybe your grandparents or your parents buy you a bond when you're young, and you grow up and you get married and you have kids and you get a job, and then you change jobs and you move around the country. A lot of people forget those savings bonds. They still own the savings bonds, but they just forget to redeem them. And so the government just has an interest-free loan. Here's what I'm driving at. Right now, over in the United States Department of Treasury, there are 100 million unredeemed savings bonds. Money that belongs to the American people. And it's no longer earning interest. 100 million savings bonds. There are only 340 million people in America. So it's a little less than a third of the people in America, though I realize some may be deceased, who have one of these savings bonds where the federal government owes them money, but the money's just sitting there and the federal government's using it and they're not paying people interest. The total amount of these unredeemed savings bonds, $36.27 billion. And that $36 billion has been there a long, long time because people have either died or they've forgotten that they have these unredeemed savings bonds. Now, this is very uncool. And a few years ago, back in 2023, I introduced a bill which actually passed. I got it passed. That said to the federal government, specifically the United States Department of Treasury, you've got to give this money back. You've got the names of people on these bonds. In many cases, you have the addresses. In a lot of cases, you have the serial numbers. Why are you just sitting on this $36 billion, these 100 million bonds? Why don't you contact people and give them their money? And they said, Kennedy, you don't understand. First of all, they said our records are a mess. Some of these bonds go back, 75 years before there were computers. The Treasury Department said to me, the records are not digitized. We'd have to comb through boxes and boxes and boxes to get names and addresses, and it's just a lot of trouble. And I said, well, I feel your pain, but you still ought to return the money to people. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to introduce a bill, and I did, and I passed it, that says the federal government has got to return this money to the people to whom it is owed. And in that bill, I provided money for the U.S. Department of Treasury to digitize those records, to go out and hire a consultant to go through all the records and put them in a database so they can be easily searched. And the U.S. Department of Treasury has done that. And I want to thank them. Hadn't been the easiest thing I've ever done. I worked with Secretary Mnuchin first, and then Secretary Yellen, and now Secretary Bessent, and all of the good women and men who work for them, but we finally gotten it done. And here's what we're ready to do. We are ready to turn the names and addresses and serial numbers over to the treasurer of every state, in Louisiana and West Virginia and every other state. We're going to give them the names and addresses and serial numbers so they can contact people in their state and say, the federal government has your money and we want to get it back to you. Why are we doing it that way through the states instead of just telling the U.S. Department of Treasury to start calling people up? Well, because the states are very experienced. Every state has what's called an unclaimed property program. What's an unclaimed property program? Well, every state has a law that says if a business, usually it's a business, not always, but if a business has your money and it can't find you, that business can't keep it. At the end of a certain period of time, usually 3 to 4 years, that business has got to turn that money over to the state. It's called unclaimed property. And the state's got to help give it back to people. What am I talking about? Let's say a utility deposit. Happens all the time. People move into an apartment. They post a utility deposit with the electricity company. They move. They forget to get their deposit back. Apartment deposit works the same way. Tax refunds. Stocks. Maybe you own a stock and it's being held by your brokerage company and you move and you don't leave a forwarding address or the forwarding address expires. That security company that brokerage can't just keep that stock. That brokerage turns that stock over to the state treasurer of every state, and it's their job to return it to people. And let me tell you something. The states do a marvelous job. You can go to any single state right now, just Google it, and find the state's unclaimed property program. And you can go spend a few minutes. You can put in your name. You can put in your parents' name. You can put in your friend's name. You can put in the name of the town in which you were raised and find people who are owed unclaimed property. And the treasurers do a great job of getting it back. They not only have websites, but they advertise and toll-free numbers, and they just do a wonderful job of getting money back to people. When I was state treasurer in Louisiana, I was in charge of Louisiana's unclaimed property program. And I was there for 17 years. I think I returned $500 million to the people in Louisiana. I had a whole unclaimed property section, men and women who would contact people all day long. And we had a very sophisticated database. So that's why the U.S. Department of Treasury, under my legislation, is not going to give this money back itself. It's going to return or give the information to the treasurer of every state, and the treasurer of every state is going to be in charge of contacting people. We've gone through this. We've been working on it. I passed the bill in 2023, I think, but we worked on it for 2 years prior to that. But we're almost home. What now we have to do is get the state treasurers to sign an agreement with the U.S. Department of Treasury. All the state treasurers have to do is sign an agreement with the U.S. Department of Treasury to cooperate, and Treasury will send them the names, and we can start returning this money to people. And I'm going to be sending another letter out in short order to all of the state treasurers, asking them to go ahead and sign that user agreement with the Treasury Department, so we can start getting this money back to people. It's free money. And remember, there are 100 million bonds, 340 million people in America, $36 billion that is owed to the American people, that the federal government has just been sitting on, that hasn't been returned. And now we're going to start doing it. If I can just get our state treasurers to turn in these user agreements. Some of them have, but others have not yet. You may not get a check for Christmas, but you'll get, if you hurry up, you can get a check in January or October or February, so you can pay some bills.